Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Batra. We are up to Perek Mishna Yud. Today's Mishna Yud should be Le'elu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Veliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Chana bat Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam beGan Eden Amen and Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim v'derefua shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa betoch Shachol Israel and Achlama Merav Binyamin Or Tzion Chai ben Dvorah. The final two Mishnayot of this chapter discuss things that a merchant must do to make sure that his scales and weights are accurate, so that he will not be cheating those who buy from him or sell to him. Cheating someone through false weights and measures is a very serious sin. The Torah in the book of Dvarim, chapter 25, verse 15 warns us, whole and honest weights shall you have. Theft through false weights is very difficult to rectify, because one does not even know from whom he has stolen or how much, so it's impossible to return the stolen money. The requirements are different for different kinds of merchants. Hasiton, a wholesaler. Now a siton buys large quantities from many producers and sells to shopkeepers in smaller quantities. Siton is the Greek word for wheat, which was bought by most wholesalers, but the word siton can be used to describe any wholesaler. So hasiton mekanech midotav achal l-30 yom. A wholesaler must wipe down his measures, meaning the containers that he uses for measuring the wine or oil that he sells, once every 30 days. Now, this rule does not apply to dry goods such as grain. And the reason he has to wipe down his measures once every 30 days by wine or oil is so that the dried out dregs do not build up in the container, making it able to hold less. If the container does not hold the full amount that it is supposed to hold, then one who uses it to sell by the container full is cheating his customers. Ubal habayit achal l-12 chodesh. But a householder who uses his measures much less often is required to wipe his containers clean only once every 12 months. Since there is less to build up, cleaning the measures once a year is sufficient. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, however, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Chiluf advarim, the opposite is true. A wholesaler who uses his measures constantly gives the liquid no chance to dry up inside the measures. Every time the measure is used, the new liquid washes out the old remnants before they have a chance to dry in place. So a yearly cleaning is enough. But a householder who uses them only once in a while must clean them every month, so nothing will dry inside them and make the measures smaller. The Mishnah now teaches rules that a shopkeeper must follow. A shopkeeper must wipe down his measures twice a week. As we learned in Mishnah 8, a shopkeeper does not need to tip out 3 extra drops for the buyer when he sells liquids. Therefore, there will be more liquid left in his measures that can dry up, and he needs to wipe them out more often than a householder or a wholesaler. He must also wash his weights, which he uses on one side of a balance scale to weigh against items such as meat or fish that are bought and sold by weight once a week. A balance scale has 2 pans. The items to be weighed are placed in one pan, and weights, each weighing, for example, 1 pound, are placed on the opposite pan. When the pans are balanced, the weight of the goods on one side is the same as that of the weights on the other side. He must do this so things do not stick to the weights and then dry onto them, making the weights heavier. If the weights have dried matter stuck to them, they will actually weigh more than they should. For example, each 1 pound weight will actually weigh 1 pound and 1 ounce. This will allow a merchant who is buying meat from a supplier to cheat him. For a piece of meat that balances against 10 such weights will actually weigh 10 pounds and 10 ounces, but the merchant will pay for only 10 pounds. Umekanech muznaim al kol mishkal umishkal, and he must wipe out the pans of the scale after each and every weighing, so that nothing from the previous sale remains in the pan, for if anything is left in the pan, he would be cheating the next customer. The pans of the scale were not flat, and any liquid or dust that oozed from the items being weighed could collect in them more easily. Therefore, they had to be wiped out after every weighing, for if something remains from the previous weighing, the next buyer will be paying for something that he will not get. And that is then of Mishna Yud. The final Mishnah of the chapter, Mishna Yud Aleph, begins by stating that the rules taught in the previous Mishnah do not apply to all types of sales. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, when were these rules about how often one must clean his scales and weights stated? Balach, when one is selling items that are moist, like meat or fish. These items contain oil or fats that will stick to the weights and the scales, so they must be cleaned regularly. Aval bayavesh not tzarich. But if one is selling dry goods such as grain or spices, there is no need to wipe down the scales because nothing will stick to the scales. Of course, if one sees that his scales or weights are dirty, he must clean them off. The rules requiring one to clean them at scheduled times, however, do not apply. Now, in addition to making sure that one's scales and weights are accurate, the Torah requires the seller to give a small amount of extra merchandise to each buyer. The Gemara derives this law from a verse in Dvarim, chapter 25, verse 15. Different places had different customs regarding exactly how to do this. In some places, the seller would add more goods to the scale during the weighing, and in other places, a fixed percentage of goods would be added to the scale at the end. The Mishnah describes each method. V'chayav la'achriya lo tefach. If the custom is to add extra goods to the scale during the sale, the seller is required to add enough extras so that the scale will tilt for the buyer by a tefach, meaning he must add enough to the side of the scale that contains the items being sold, so that side of the scale is not even with the weights on the other side, but instead is a tefach lower than the weights. Hayah shokelo ayin b'ayin, but if the custom is that he weighs the items for him only until the two sides of the scale are even, and only adds the extra as a percentage of the scale at the end, noteno gerumav, then he must give him the extra weight using the following formula: echad l'asara balach, 1/10 of a measure for every 10 measures of liquids that he sells, which is 1% of the sale. V'echad l'esrim b'yavesh, 1/20th of a measure for every 20 measures of dry goods, which is 1/4 of 1%, 1/400th of the sale. Now, local custom must also be followed regarding what type of containers to use when selling. Mekom shenagu lamod bedaka, in a place where the custom is to measure using a small container and to use it several times when selling a larger amount. Lo yamod begasa, one may not measure once with the large container. Begasa lo yamod bedakan, where the custom is to measure the larger scales using a large container, one may not measure multiple times with a small container. If the custom is to weigh a large purchase all at once, the buyer cannot make the seller weigh it out a litra at a time, because adding extra goods to tilt the scale by a tefach for each of many small weighings will cost the seller more. Now, the final rulings of the Mishnah deal with customs about how containers for selling dry goods such as flour must be filled. Limchok lo yigdosh, in a place where the custom is to level off the container until it is even with the top after it is filled. One may not heap the goods over the level of the top of the container. The buyer cannot force the seller to heap the container even if he is willing to pay more for it, as the seller can say that he only agreed to sell a level container full. Likewise, the seller cannot force the buyer to buy a heaped container and pay extra for it if he does not wish to. Ligdosh leimchok, and where the custom is to heap the goods over the level of the brim, one may not level off the container even if he charges less for level containers. In all cases, local custom must be followed. And that is on about today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.